Thanks for tuning back in to a little bit more of Out of the Dust. We pick up on page 16. This one's called Not Too Much to Ask. We haven't had a good crop in 3 years, not since the bounty of 31. We're all whittled down to bones these days, even Ma with her new round belly. But still, when the committee came asking, Ma donated 3 jars of applesauce and some cured pork and a feed sack nightie she'd sewn for our comin' baby. That was February of 1934. Mr. Hardy's money handling. This one's called. It was Daddy's birthday and Ma decided to bake him a cake. There wasn't money enough for anything like a real present. Ma sent me to fetch the extras with 50 cents she'd been hiding away. Don't go to Joyce City, Billy, she said. You can get what we need down at Hardley's store. I slipped the coins into my sweater pocket, the pocket without the hole, thinking about how many sheets of new music 50 cents would buy. Mr. Hardley glared when the Wonder Bread door banged shut behind me. He squinted as I creaked across the wooden floor. Mr. Hardley was in the habit of charging too much for his stale food, and he made bad change when he thought he couldn't get away with it. I squinted back at him as I gave him Ma's order. Mr. Hardley's been worse than normal since his attic filled with dust and collapsed under the weight. He hired folks for the repairs and argued over every nail and every little minute. The whole place took shoveling for days before he could open again, and some stock was so bad it had to be thrown away. The stove clanked in the corner as Mr. Hardley filled Ma's order. I could smell apples, ground coffee, and peppermint. I sorted through the patterns on the feed bags, sneezed dust, blew my nose. When Mr. Hardley finished sacking my things, I paid the bill, and tucking the list in my pocket along with the change, hurried home so Ma could bake the cake before Daddy came in. But after Ma emptied the sack, setting each packet out on the oilcloth, she counted her change. And I remembered with a sinking feeling that I hadn't kept an eye on Mr. Hardley's money handling, and Mr. Hardley had cheated again. Only this time he cheated himself, giving us 4 extra cents. So while Ma mixed a cake, I walked back to Mr. Hardley's store, back through the dust, back through the Wonder Bread door, and thinking about the second-hand music in a moldy box at the shop in Joyce City. Music I could have for 2 cents a sheet. I placed Mr. Hardley's overpayment on the counter and turned to head back home. Mr. Hardley cleared his throat, and I wondered for a moment if he'd call me back to offer a piece of peppermint or pick me out an apple from his crate. But he didn't, and that's okay. Ma would have thrown a fit if I'd taken a gift from him. That was February 1934. 50 miles south of home, this one's called. In Armadillo, wind blew plate glass windows in, tore electric signs down, ripped wheat straight out of the ground. That was February 1934. Okay, this next one called Rules for Dining. Ma has rules for setting the table. I place plates upside down, glasses bottom side up, napkins folded over forks, knives, and spoons. When dinner is ready, we sit down together, and Ma says, now. We shake out our napkins, spread them on our laps, and flip over our glasses and plates, exposing neat circles, round comments of what life would be without dust. Daddy says, the potatoes are peppered plenty tonight, Polly, and chocolate milk for dinner. Aren't we in clover? When really all our pepper and chocolate, it's nothing but dust. I heard word from Livy Kellen. The Kellens can't find work. can't get food. Livy's brother, Reuben, 15 last summer, took off thinking to make it on his own. I hope he's okay. With a baby growing inside Ma, it scares me thinking, where would we be without somewhere to live? Without some work to do? Without something to eat? At least we've got milk, even if we have to chew it. That was February 1934. So's this one. Breaking drought. After 70 days of wind and sun and wind and clouds and wind and sand, after 70 days of wind and dust, a little rain came. This one's called Dazzled. In the kitchen, she is my ma. In the barn and the fields, she is my daddy's wife. But in the parlor, Ma is something different. She isn't much to look at, so long and skinny, her teeth poor, her dark hair always needing a wash, but from the time I was 4, I remember being dazzled by her whenever she played the piano. Daddy bought it, an old Kramer, his wedding gift to her. She came to his house and found gaps in the walls, a rusty bed, no running water, and that piano gleaming in the corner. Daddy gets soft eyes standing behind her while she plays. I want someone to look that way at me. On my 5th birthday, Ma sat me down beside her and started me to reading music, started me to playing. I'm not half so good as Ma. She can pull Daddy into the parlor even after the last milking when he's so beat he barely knows his own name, and all he wants is a mattress under his bones. You've got to be something to get his notice that time of day. But Ma can. I'm not half so good with my crazy playing as she is with her fine tunes and her fancy finger work. But I'm good enough for Arlie, I guess. That was March of 1934. This one's called Debts. Daddy is thinking of taking a loan from Mr. Roosevelt and his men to get some new wheat planted, where the winter crops has spindled out and dried. Mr. Roosevelt promises Daddy won't have to pay a dime till the crop comes in. Daddy says, I can turn the fields over, start again. It's sure to rain soon. Wheat's sure to grow. Ma says, what if it doesn't? Daddy takes off his hat, roughs up his hair, puts the hat back on. 'Cause it'll rain, he says. Ma says, Bae, it hasn't rained enough to grow wheat in 3 years. Daddy looks like a fight brewing. He takes that red face of his out to the barn to keep from feuding with a pregnant Ma. I ask Ma how, after all this time, Daddy still believes in rain. Well, it rains enough, Ma says, now and again, to keep a person hoping. But even if it didn't, your daddy would have to believe. It's coming on spring, and he's a farmer. So that was March of 1934. So is this one. Foul as a maggoty stew, it's called. Arlie Wanderdale said the rehearsals for Sunny of Sunnyside shouldn't take me out of school more than twice next week. When I told Ma, she got angry about my missing school to play piano for some show. Me and Daddy were trying our best to please Ma for fear of what it might do to the baby if we don't. I don't know why she's so against me playing. She says that school is important, but I do all right in school. I know she doesn't like the kind of music I play, but sometimes I think she's just plain jealous when I'm at the piano and she's not. And maybe she's a little afraid of me going somewhere with the music she can't follow, or of the music taking me so far away one day. I'll never come home. Whatever the reason, she said I couldn't do it. Arlie had to get somebody to take my place. I do as she says. I go to school, and in the afternoons I come home, run through my chores, do my reading and my math work at the kitchen table, and all the while I glare at Ma's back with a scowl foul as a maggoty stew. Okay, this one's called State Tests. It's in March of 1934. When I got home, I told Ma our school scored higher than the whole state on achievement tests, and I scored top of 8th grade. Ma nodded. I knew you could. That's all she said. She was proud, I could tell, but she didn't coo like Mad Dog's Ma or go on like Miss Krillin used to do. Daddy says, that's not your Ma's way. I wish it was. I wish she'd give me a little more to hold on to than I knew you could. Instead, she makes me feel like she's just taken me in like I was. Instead, she makes me feel like she's just taken me in like I was so much flannel dry, on the line. 1934, March. All right, this one's called Fields of Flashing Light. I heard the wind rise and stumbled from my bed, down the stairs, out the front door, into the yard. The night sky kept flashing. Lightning danced down on its spindly legs. I sensed it before I knew it was coming. I heard it, I smelled it, I tasted it. Dust. While Ma and Daddy slept, the dust came, tearing up fields where the winter wheat, set for harvest in June, stood helpless. I watched the plants surviving after so much drought and so much wind. I watched them fry or flatten or blow away like bits of cast-off rags. It wasn't until the dust turned toward the house like a fired locomotive and I fled, barefoot and breathless, back inside. It wasn't until the dust hissed against the windows, until it retched the roof, that Daddy woke. He ran to the storm, his overalls half hooked over his union suit. Daddy, I called, you can't stop dust. Ma told me to cover the beds, push the scatter rugs around against the doors, dampen the rags around the windows, wiping dust out of everything. She made coffee and biscuits, waiting for Daddy to come in. Sometime after 4, rubbing low on her back, Ma sank down into a chair at the kitchen table and covered her face. Daddy didn't come back for hours, not until the temperature dropped so low it brought snow. Ma and I sighed, grateful, staring out at the dirty flakes, but our relief didn't last. The wind snatched that snow right off the fields, leaving behind a sea of dust, waves and waves and waves of dust rippling across our yard. Daddy came in. He sat across from Ma and blew his nose. Mud streamed out. He coughed and spit out mud. If he had cried, his tears would have been mud too, but he didn't cry, and neither did Ma. That was March of 1934, and that is the end of winter. So tune in next time and we'll pick up on spring.